Well, good afternoon. I'd like to start by thanking the NASC and the Access Industry Forum for this opportunity to talk to you today. I hope you can all hear me okay. I'm going to start by looking through some of the key guidance notes that have changed recently from the National Access and Scaffolding Confederation and have a bit of a summary of other guidance that has changed recently. We're going to start with the main talking points in our industry at the moment, which is preventing falls in scaffolding, safety guidance number 4, or SG4, as it's commonly referred to. I think it's important if we understand where SG4 has come from, and as part of that, we look at the requirements of the work at height regs, the last revision in 2005, which saw the requirements to consider collective protection over personal. The work at height regs requires that you avoid work at height wherever possible. Now, by virtue that somebody's decided to employ a scaffolding contractor, normally means that somebody else has made that decision that we're not going to avoid work at height. We have seen some innovative design and planning which has enabled scaffolders to avoid work at height, but that can't be achieved in every scaffolding application. So it brings us to the next stage in the hierarchy: preventing falls, choosing the most suitable method of working and the most suitable equipment to prevent a fall in the first place. If we can't prevent a fall, then we've got to mitigate both the consequences and the distance of a potential fall. But as I said, at all stages, considering collective protection over personal. I like to think of collective protection as passive protection. If you think of a guardrail on a scaffolder's working platform, it sits there all day doing nothing until somebody falls against it. Whereas personal protection, your harness, is active protection. You've physically got to attach it to something for it to afford you any protection. And we know from the HSE's and the NASC statistics that lots of scaffolders are falling with wearing harnesses that weren't used. So looking at the top of our hierarchy again, as I say, we've seen innovative examples of avoiding work at height through good planning and innovative design, such as handrails fixed to structural steelwork or precast concrete sections before they're craned into place, so the handrails are fixed on the ground and they're in place when that element of the structure is craned into place. We've seen large modular sections of scaffolding pre-assembled, sometimes off-site, sometimes on-site, but erected on the ground and then craned into position. So, what sort of success have we had with SG4 over the years? Well, according to NASC accident statistics, falls from a working platform or scaffold has seen a significant reduction since the major revision of SG4 in 2000. In 1999, we had 93 falls from height recorded within the NASC membership. In 2009, that had reduced to 20. That represented a 78% reduction in the actual number of falls and something like an 84% reduction in the accident frequency rate. That's despite an 18.6% increase in the number of operatives working within the NASC membership during that time. So the statistics speak for themselves. More time exposed to risk and less number of incidents. So what are the issues surrounding SG4? Well, the HSE made it clear in 2008 that there were certain elements of the tunnelling principle established in SG4 that they were unhappy with. And this was primarily the unprotected traverse that allowed scaffolders to walk out on an unprotected edge for the length of material that they were guardrailing with. So effectively, a scaffolder could walk out up to 21 feet, and before he puts his hand on his spanner, he would have to clip on. We have to recognise in scaffolding that there is an inherent risk of a fall that can never be completely eliminated. There are certain applications where the primary means of protection will be personal fall protection equipment. Over the edge work such as cantilevers, drop lift scaffolds, suspended scaffolds, scaffolders required to crab beams, climb along beams, will need to rely wholly on personal fall protection equipment. Within this latest revision, we focused on the creation of the scaffolder's safe zone. Scaffolders are required to focus upon creating the safe zone with a minimum of a fully boarded working platform without gaps where people could fall, and a minimum of a single main guardrail wherever there's a risk of a fall. So here you can see illustrated the scaffolder's working platform with a minimum of a single guardrail, fully boarded, and the requirements of a finished working platform for other trades. Scaffolders are encouraged on finished working platforms to progressively install the double guardrails as they go. There is an exception to the fully boarded requirement, is that if scaffolders are using a conventional carabiner that is required to attach to the ledger below foot level, then they can still omit one board from that fully boarded platform. Those boards can be to one side or centralised to allow access to both ledgers. Some of the principles that existed established in previous versions of SG4 still exist. The requirement for boarding out from below is still there. Also, the requirement of the tunnelling principle to progressively work away from your ladder access and work back to it still exists. Prior to SG4, often the ladder for access and egress for the scaffolders was the last thing that would turn up. We've clarified some of the grey areas that existed within the previous versions of SG4, particularly at what point does the scaffolder become at risk of a fall, and we've specified now that any scaffolder working within a metre of a leading edge needs to be clipped on. Again, some of the good practice established previously in SG4, such as the creation of a safe handling bay with double guardrails that enable scaffolders to receive and walk out material without the need to be clipped on, so the use of double guardrails in these instances. Otherwise, if a scaffolder is reaching below the height of a single guardrail, he needs to be clipped on. So we've clarified working with a single guardrail. So in instances where the scaffolder has to reach below the handrail to fix a brace, to receive material and so on, they need to be clipped on. Other instances, when raising and lowering platform boards, when working with voids on the inside of the scaffold, such as window openings, other inside gaps between the main platform and the facade, any unprotected stop ends, or gaps within the platform, such as an unprotected ladder trap, scaffolders need to be clipped on when encroaching within a metre of these gaps. One of the unintentional consequences of some of the collective protection featured in SG4 means that scaffolders from time to time will have to top out or hemp, as the term we use in scaffolding, over the top of a handrail. So it introduces additional hazards that employers will have to consider. So what methods for creating the safe zone are available to the scaffolders? Well, first of all, MIIRSM. MIIRSM were once seen as a competitor to the scaffolding trade. Now they're seen as a tool of the trade. There are certain scaffolding applications where there are clear advantages from using a MIIRSM to build the scaffold. Suspended scaffolds, as you can see here, and as a minimum requirement, the HSE would expect to see MIIRSM to be used for edge protection wherever access was possible from the ground. So moving on to collective protection in the form of advanced guardrails. We've divided advanced guardrails into three categories in this revision of SG4. We have advanced guardrail systems, we have advanced guardrail tools, and we have advanced guardrail methods, which I'll explain in the presentation. So proprietary advanced guardrails, they push up the outside. In this case, here's an example of a telescopic system. There are concerns about the use of this system on the inside face where there are protrusions from the scaffold. In this case, a change in the sequence of work can become critical, and the guardrail needs to be pushed up in advance of the lift being formed. An earlier form of the advanced guardrail system, the frame type systems, there's a couple of variants available now that again push up the outside. We've seen the introduction in 2008 of a horizontal proprietary advanced guardrail, best suited for long straight runs, but it can be used on the inside or the outside of the scaffold. Moving on to some of the examples of advanced guardrail tools. We like to think of these as tools for raising the guardrails in advance that you're going to leave behind. Here is a featured advanced guardrail tool, a pivoting version that actually raises up to two 21s at any one time. A new innovation that we featured for the first time in SG4 is a push-up type advanced guardrail tool, a special coupler that fixes to the standards, uses conventional scaffold tubes to form the guardrails and is moved up into place using a wand or a positioning tool. System scaffold manufacturers are beginning to consider their products and introducing new systems of work, and in this case an example, an advanced guardrail tool for the Hughes system. We were keen in this current economic climate to feature in SG4 some of the improvised methods that utilise standard scaffolding equipment that most scaffolding contractors have in their yard. In this case, an improvised frame system using conventional scaffolding materials. A goalpost is erected on the ground and then fixed to the scaffold and can be raised from the working platform as the work progresses. Another alternative is a horizontal version of an improvised guardrail. A scaffold tube is fixed above the main guardrails and is pushed along horizontally, similar to the proprietary type system. And again, we're seeing proprietary system scaffold manufacturers developing innovative methods of working using standard components within their equipment. In 2008, we introduced the short lift system of work, where scaffolds are erected in 1 metre lift heights. We're seeing this becoming very popular in industrial scaffolding applications and offshore, where effectively the scaffold is erected in 1 metre lifts, the handrails become the ledgers become the handrails, and so on. The scaffolder's step, introduced in 2005, has seen further developments from the original step. Originally, the HSE were concerned not about people climbing on the step as long as they were clipped on, but were more concerned about people jumping from the step onto the platform and the risk of board failure. We've seen innovations and improvements in these products with the introduction of short steps and step ladders. Again, alternatives to this with system scaffolding. Here we can see an example of a proprietary system scaffold using the console bracket or hop-up brackets on the inside, which were originally designed to be used on the outside of the scaffold or the inside to create an inside platform. And in this case, you can see that they've created a temporary platform in every other bay to put the handrails up in advance and linking the middle bays from either side. As with most legislation and most guidance notes, the last resort is the use of personal fall protection equipment, or PPE. In this case, we feature the 100% protected traverse as the opposite to the unprotected traverse, utilising double lanyards where a scaffolder can traverse from anchor point to anchor point, continuously attached. This system is greatly enhanced by the use of proprietary anchor devices that are specially designed to be fixed to the standards, rather than a conventional scaffolder's hook, which relies upon being clipped to the ledger below your feet. Other considerations in SG4, the use of temporary edge protection, pavement gantries, pavement lifts, floor height lifts, installed fall protection systems, protection fans, cantilevered structures, temporary roofs. Some of you will notice that are familiar with the 2005 version of SG4 that the title was extended to false work. We still include false work, even though we've dropped the name from the title. There's still a section on false work and form work within the main SG4 guidance. We now include hoist towers, debris chutes, and birdcage scaffolds are extensively covered, and we've seen now the withdrawal of SG23, the specific guidance for birdcage scaffolds, as it's now comprehensively covered within SG4. Also, loading towers reflects the changes in our industry brought about by modern methods of construction, where more and more scaffolding contractors are being required to erect standalone loading towers that aren't abutted to an independent or perimeter scaffold. So consideration has to be made for erecting, altering and dismantling of these standalone loading towers, and again that's featured in SG4. So what steps are the HSE taking? Well, they required SG4 to be updated. The NASC had an undertaking that this would be done every 5 years, and we fulfilled that commitment in 2010. Field inspectors are asking principal contractors, what steps are you taking for collective protection with your scaffolding contractors? So scaffolding contractors and principal contractors that aren't using collective protection, I suggest that now's the time to consider adopting a collective method of working. HSE inspectors don't have to see your scaffolders working. They have very small windows of opportunity to actually see scaffolding operations, but we leave the telltale signs behind. If the HSE don't see the scaffolders' guardrails, the correctly supported working platforms with intermediate transoms, then it could mean the difference between whether the HSE decide to drive on your site or not. And the flip side to that, no transoms, no guardrails. It's plain for everyone to see that the scaffolding contractors haven't even attempted to comply with SG4. Moving on now to some other guidance notes. Let's start with SG19 Rescue that was revised last year. It follows the HSE and Health and Safety Laboratories research into suspension trauma, and it includes the current first aid treatment advice. It provides standard rescue plans for typical scaffolding operations that scaffolding contractors can choose from, rather than having long-winded rescue procedures included in method statements. And as I say, the conclusion of the HSE research was that there was no need to change the traditional first aid advice, and hence the revision of our guidance note. TG20, Technical Guidance number 20. Under the work at height regulations, it is a requirement that all scaffolds have strength and stability calculations, unless there's a note of general calculations covering structural arrangements contemplated, which in simple terms usually means a generic design. And a good example of that would be a bricklayer's loading bay on a typical house building site. There might be 90 plots on that house building site, and each plot will be exactly the same in terms of the loading bay, and as long as the scaffolders comply with that design, no problem. Otherwise, the scaffold must be assembled in conformity with a generally recognised standard configuration. And as far as the HSE are concerned now, that is TG20 for tube and fitting scaffolds. A statement from Philip White in June last year. As from the 1st of January 2011, the Health and Safety Executive will no longer acknowledge BS 5973 as the recognised standard for the design of tube and fitting scaffold structures. TG20 is a technical guidance note, again available from the National Access and Scaffolding Confederation. It is a guide to good practice with tube and fitting, and it now comes in 2 volumes. Volume 1 includes basic scaffolds that can be erected without design in Section 2, and Volume 2 is further technical information for scaffolds outside of those covered in Volume 1. SG27 is a long-awaited guidance note for traditional tube and fitting edge protection, and it helps comply with BSEN 13374 and addresses some of the issues surrounding the use of traditional tube and fitting that have been a bit of a grey area previously, and it now establishes a minimum performance standard for a number of typical edge protection applications in scaffolding equipment. Other revised or new guidance, safety guidance from the NASC. Last year we saw a new manual handling guidance. We've seen guidance on risk assessment, health surveillance, safety nets, which categorically states that safety nets should not be fixed to scaffolding unless the scaffolding has been designed for the purpose. Issues with substance abuse, consultation with the workforce, advice for employers on induction training, methods of access and egress, guidelines for timber frame construction, or scaffolds for timber frame construction, and in line with the HSE's initiative last year on working from vehicles, there's guidelines with some practical examples for the scaffolding industry. I note there that the guide for the management guide for slip, strips and falls The most significant cause of accidents, the largest number of accidents caused in the scaffolding industry is actually trips and falls of scaffolders walking across other people's sites. Most people would perceive it to be falls from height or falling objects, but the most common cause of accidents in our industry is actually slips and trips at the same level. Other technical guidance. We saw the introduction in 2009 of the board standard BS 2482. TG20 requires you to use British Standard boards to that standard, and there's a further guidance note, TG5 and TG6, which looks at the care and maintenance of scaffold boards to that standard. There's other information about fire damage. Temporary roofs is a particularly good technical guidance which preempts what we're hoping to see in a European standard for the design of temporary roofs in the near future. Tying down of scaffold boards and the identification of EN fittings is also covered under new guidance. Training and competence. The construction industry scaffolders record scheme has long been established since the 1970s as the industry standard for scaffolder training. Some recent developments in the scissors scheme. The introduction in 2006 of the System Scaffold Product Training Scheme now means that scaffolders can have the System Scaffold Product Training endorsed on the back of their card. We've also seen last year the introduction of a new Scaffold Inspection Training Scheme, which for the first time creates an industry standard, a national standard for basic and advanced levels in scaffold inspection. That brings me to the end of my whistle-stop tour of all the recently updated NASC guidance. I'm happy to answer any questions.